breathing. But if you recall, I started that by talking about that any musical instrument, the voice included, has three things to it. A power source, in our case that's air, something that vibrates, in our case that's the vocal cords, and something that is a resonance cavity, right? And the shape of the tubing in a trombone, for example, is what makes it sound like a trombone instead of a trumpet, which has very different tubing, and similarly a timpani. So we're going to talk about resonance today, and we're going to play a little bit in that space as well. So first I'm going to start with the trick question, but by now probably it isn't. So in the human voice, as we sing, where are, in your body, where are the resonance cavities? Where are the spaces that once the vibrating thing vibrates, that the fluctuating air goes to turn into your voice? Mouth, I hear. Head. Curious. Okay, what? Sinuses. Sinuses, okay. Any others? Chest, I hear.
Chest up.
Okay, I'm sorry?
The chest all the way up.
And the chest up, okay. So, how many of you are engineers? Okay, how many of you are biologists or doctors? Okay, so let's look at the physics of this, okay? You take a breath, right? Air goes from out here into your lungs, right?
Yep.
And from the lungs, when you let that air out to create a sound, where does the air go? It's in your lungs, and eventually it's going to end up out there, right? And what's the path from lungs to out there? Right?
Through the trachea.
Think about it, right? It's coming up, right? That funny thing called the trachea, which kind of goes near that other funny thing that food goes down. But just air comes out of it, right? It goes up in here and it touches and causes to vibrate the vocal folds, which are kind of right in here, right? And where does the air go from there? Does it go multiple directions or a single direction? It kind of goes a single direction, right? Otherwise, it'd be really weird, right? Because if you just went, that's kind of singing, except that the vocal cords didn't close, right? But notice that when you sing, you don't go, right? So the air is going to go all the way from the lungs, past the vocal cords, and out. Right? So, although it's fun to talk about chest resonance, no air goes there once it's past the vocal cords, right? It can't. It's going the other direction. So, if you talk about chest resonance, the only resonance you get from your chest is a little bit of sympathetic vibration that might be because something up here is vibrating and the bones are all kind of connected and it works its way back here, right? But the chest cavity is not a resonance cavity, right, for the voice. Oh, that's chest voice, we call it, but there's nothing going on here in terms of air resonating like it does in some other spots. Okay, so from here it goes. Where's the first place it goes once it leaves the vocal cords?
Back of the throat.
It's the throat, right? So the throat, man, that's a big old resonating cavity, right? And you can tell because on that note we're gonna take a nice big yawny breath like we've all gotten in the habit, and we're gonna just sing a nice Italian O. So it'll be oh, big breath. Oh. Good. Now, this time, I want you to do the following. We're going to take the nice big breath again, and we're going to start on that O, and then I want you to kind of constrict the throat a little bit. If it helps, you can even take your hands and push on your throat a little bit. But we're going to make that throat space a little less open than it is otherwise. Here we go. So you hear the difference, right? You probably feel the difference as well. One kind of feels relaxed, and one doesn't. So any of you maybe have in some part of your range a spot where the throat maybe constricts. Probably those high notes for sure. Right? You can almost feel kind of the constriction here. So the first and probably most important resonating space is the throat. That's exactly why we talk about, because that opens and relaxes the throat and keeps it open. And there's almost no kind of vocal production I know of that demands constricted throat. Right? It's just, right? There may be something funny in sound effects, right? But normally that's not. Okay, so throat is one. Where's the next space that air goes after it leaves the throat? So it's kind of coming up from the vocal cords here. It's coming up this nice big resonance cavity, which is the throat, all this area back here, right? And what happens next? If you think of it, the air's going this way, what's going to happen? Unless you have a hole in the top of your head, so it's probably going to bounce because it's going to hit something, right? So what it hits is the roof of your mouth, right? Because that kind of goes this way where the throat goes that way. So you can think of this air hose, boing, and then it goes where? In your mouth, right? So mouth is another huge resonating cavity. So this time we're going to assume the nice big open yawny throat. That's really good. And then we're going to let our mouth be about this far open, right? So it's going to be the same O vowel, but no, let's make an A vowel. So it'll be an A. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
It'll be an A vowel, but it won't be one of these. It'll be one of these. Little tiny ah vowel. Right? The throat is still open, little tiny ah vowel. Here we go, big breath. Now, open it. So, is there any question that the size of the cavity in here affects the overall resonance of your voice? Not at all. Yes, sir.
I just have a question about
Yes.
what you're meaning when you say mouth.
Uh-huh.
You mean the inside of the mouth, right? Not necessarily the lip space.
Anything that food could find its way into.
Okay.
We'll get to lips in a minute.
That's why I want to make sure. It's not
we'll get to
lips.
lips in a minute.
Yeah.
They say right now I'm talking about behind the teeth and all the way from the back of the neck or the back of the throat forward. Okay. Now, so we've got throat, we've got mouth. All right. Somebody said nasal cavities, right? Now, yes and no, right? And I'll give you the pretty much the 100% uniform now agreed to vocal pedagogy about the nasal cavities, right? Think about what so you're the doc, right? What do these look like?
There are actually spaces behind your cheek.
Yeah, and is it like one big spot?
One on each side here, one in the middle near the back.
Yeah. And
Very little else. There's something called an ethmoid sinus between your eyes.
Yeah.
Nothing like that.
And then, so if vibrating air found its way into the nasal cavities, and it can, right, then it's going to bounce around in those little tiny cavities up there, little tiny by comparison to the mouth and the throat, right? They're like little tiny things, it's like this big, right? And they're going to bounce around in there, and they're going to get a very unique sound if you let vibrating air get into those cavities. And that sound is this, right? That's what happens when air goes into the nasal cavities. Right? Now, there are times when that's exactly what you want, but not many. Right? So, pretty much the agreed to philosophy by most credible voice teachers is the nasal cavities, with two exceptions, really are not terribly useful in producing a quality vocal sound, right? Because it will sound instead of right? Now, I'm going to give you the exception, and we'll play going back and forth between the sound that uses the nasal cavities and the one that doesn't. We're going to do and then go to an NG, because you can't make an NG without air going into the nasal cavity. So big, nice, relaxed, big open ah. Good. Now, what you've just been doing is you've been going back and forth between allowing air to go into the nasal cavities or not, right? And both of those have unique sounds. Now, if I said never ever let air go in there, then you could never sing the word song, right? Because you just couldn't do the NG. Ends like on, sometimes a little air will go up in that space as well. But other than ends and NGs, for the most part, there's really no use in getting air into the nasal cavity. So what we usually do is we teach you how to avoid it. And that's exactly how, right? Now, let's go back, and I want you to, first I want you to take your finger and stick it up on the hard roof of your mouth, and then let it drift back, and see if the so, you don't have to go to the gag line, but eventually the hardness of that roof of your mouth changes, right? When you get back in the back, it turns soft, it's soft tissue, and that's why we call it the soft palate, right? Now, the soft palate is a voluntary muscle. You can control it, right? And you just did when you went na, na, na. So this time we're going to do the same and I want you to just kind of feel, not with your finger, but just, the sensation of the lifting and the dropping of the soft palate, which is causing that. Here we go, big breath. Good. Anyone not feel something going on back there, right? A class that I taught just this last weekend up in Ontario, somebody said, well, I feel my tongue doing something back there too. And this tongue can get involved as well. But for the most part, all of you have pretty good control over the soft palate, and that's what causes the air to go into the nasal cavities or not. And not, other than NG and N, is pretty much the way we want to sing most of the time. And that's why we do that yawn breath, because not only does it open the back of the throat, it also lifts the soft palate, which in effect kind of closes the trap door, so that when the air comes up here, it's just going to bounce and come out here instead of finding its way up into the nasal cavities here, right? That's another reason why, and there are a couple different schools of thought. It's another reason why, though, I like to encourage people mostly to breathe through their mouth, not through their nose when they sing, right? Because if you think about it, if you breathe it through your nose, and the air is going to get to here, well, the soft palate had to do what? It had to drop, kind of like the NG space, or otherwise the air couldn't get past the trapdoor, right? So if the soft palate is dropped, now to get the tone you want, it has to lift, and that's sort of like one more thing to worry about. So that's kind of a good way of making sure that the soft palate is lifted. Okay, any other resonance spaces? Your inner ear or your left thigh, or not really. Not really. Most other resonances that may happen will be maybe like bones vibrating a little bit, but that doesn't really impact the air that comes out here that everybody hears, right? So it's really pretty simple, that throat, mouth. Okay, now David's point is a very good one. There are some things that will get in the way of that resonance other than just saying open your mouth and have your throat open, all right? The biggest ones that I know of are the things on the outbound side of your teeth, right? These, okay? And we've played a little bit, especially with the O vowel, right? But we're going to do it again on the ah because it vibrates so well. So we're going to take a nice big breath. We're going to sing ah, and then on cue, when I do this, I want you to do this with your lips. All right? All right, so we'll wrap the lips over the teeth, and then I'll go, and we'll take them off the teeth again, right? So, and you'll hear the difference. Here we go, big breath. Get in touch with the feeling and the overall ambiance, keep going, of that sound, and now we'll change. some of you that changed the ah to an O vowel,
Yeah.
which was curious, and that's fine. But did you have a sense of the vibrant nature of one versus not of the other, right? So the reason the lips do that is the same reason you never see a brass instrument with a bell that goes this way, right? It always goes this way, right? Because what you're doing is you're saying, I've got this vibrating column of air, and I'm going to release it into the world, and I want to make darn sure that every last molecule has the opportunity to find its vibrating way into the world, right? So where if I do this, I just choked off a bunch of them, right? Okay, so that's one thing that will get in the way. What's another thing that's inside one of the two major vibration areas or resonance areas? Yeah. So we're going to do, my favorite here is an A vowel. So we're going to do A, and I want you to get in touch with where your tongue is. And I'll give you a hint. It should start, because this is the preferred, it should start pretty much kind of nice and low and flat with the tip right up against the lower gum ridge. A, if you could see that, it's right there. A, okay, big breath. Good. Now some of you are already doing the other one, and that's cool. But we'll make sure all of you do now. We're going to go from A, right, with the tongue right there, and I want you to let the tongue drift away from the gum ridge and kind of go back towards the back of your throat. Right? So play with that a little bit right now so you have a feeling what that's going to feel like. All right, got it. Hey, here we go. Try to make it sound like an A, though. Good. Do you hear the difference? You hear the difference, right? When the tongue drifts, what's it doing? It's kind of raising and getting in the way of the airflow. Right? When the tongue is kind of down here in a nice low and front space, the vibrating air has got a nice way on the way out. Hey, versus hey, right? For me, A was the vowel I always swallowed my tongue on. For you, it may be some other vowel, maybe ooh, maybe any number of, but we want to make sure the tongue kind of stays out of the way. All right, so I think we're about out of time here. So kind of keep this in mind when you're looking at how do I get the most resonant sound out of the instrument I have, right? Obviously, you get plenty of air underneath it, but we're going to make sure the throat is open and relaxed, and that yawn breath does that. We're going to make sure that the mouth doesn't kind of get really shrunk down to this little bitty space. It'll be as nice and big and open as you can do naturally, right? We'll make sure that the soft palate is lifted, except for NGs and Ns, right? Because that's the only way you can make them. And we'll make sure that the tongue is relaxed and kind of easily lying in the bottom of your mouth. And with that, and everything else being wonderful, that should give you probably the best voice that the best resonance that you can. So I'm sorry, there's one other thing. We talked about back resonance and front resonance. All we're doing there mostly is enhancing the space where the appropriate sound is produced, right? So we talk about back resonance. Right? All the richness comes from kind of the throat and the very back of your mouth. If that was closed off, it would sound even with a big wide open mouth, it would sound but if it's not, if it's open, it's nice and rich, okay? Now, front resonance, the thing that adds brilliance, largely does come from the front part of your mouth. So the reason we say smile, or some teachers will say snarl, right, is it actually stretches that front space just a little tiny bit and add some character to your voice, right? So if I do, like Scott was doing earlier, and then I just go, right? You can hear the difference for that, right? And all of you know how to do that, right? So there's isn't a whole lot more to it than that. If somebody says, I want a little brighter sound here, then you just smile at them more, right? Or a little darker sound, maybe you can get a little frowny and that would be okay. Okay. Now, have you ever heard the phrase "sing through the mask"?
Yep.
Probably some of you have. I don't use that for the following reason. A lot of people have an image of it. That means the sound comes here, right? Remember what we just said about nasal cavities, right? Well, you should avoid the temptation when somebody says "sing through the mask" to say "I'm going to sing right there," right? Because that just changed it to that nasal cavity. It really means stretch that little space in your mouth so that a smile or a snarl gives you that sound. Yes, sir.
Would you agree that what Scott is asking for when he talks about everything is happening above the molars is similar to what you just talked about?
Well, that's doing two things. One is it's accentuating the space, right, so that the space isn't small, right? And the other is it's doing the same thing that I ask for when I say smile or snarl, right? It's stretching that front space so you get that kind of a sound instead of that kind of a sound, right? And you get a difference.
It's
Okay?
getting off of this too, right? So I'm not sitting on the cards.
Yeah, this is just nice and relaxed. Okay? I hope that helps. That's what I got tonight. Thank you.